everybody. Welcome to One Single Story. It is day 91, and we have decided as a staff that because this is so much work, that this is going to be our last podcast.
Yeah, it's just too much.
Yeah, we just can't do it, and we're sorry. We know you've enjoyed this. We've gotten lots of positive feedback from it, but the preparation, the time recording takes us away from our daily visitation.
Daily visitation, yeah.
I went too far.
Yeah, you might have tipped your hand.
Also, you need to know it's not just day 91, it's April 1st. So happy April Fool's Day. And on another note, the worst thing I ever did in my entire life on April Fool's was when I was pastoring my first church. April Fool's Day came on a Sunday, and I got up and read a resignation letter. Those people were crying.
I was going to say, had they stood and cheered and clapped,
I would have been the one. But they were crying.
Been on you.
And I felt so bad, like this is the most horrible prank you could ever pray.
Yeah, that was terrible. But just for clarification, we're not stopping.
No, we're not. Yeah, no, we're continuing on as long as we can. Anyway, as long as there's not a revolt and we get stoned for playing a joke on people. So today we're in Judges 7. It's one of those semi-famous stories of the Bible. It's Gideon defeating the Midianites. So we'll preach on Gideon's call, I believe. But this is them defeating the Midianites. And I'll read a couple of verses and then we're going to have a conversation. It says, so Jerubbaal, it's got a hyphen there, so I'm going to separate it. That is Gideon and his army got up early and went as far as the spring of Herod. The armies of Midian were camped north of them in the valley near the hill of Moreh. The Lord said to Gideon, you have too many warriors with you. If I let all of you fight the Midianites, the Israelites will boast to me that they saved themselves by their own strength. Therefore, tell the people, whoever is timid or afraid may leave this mountain and go home. So 22,000 of them went home, leaving only 10,000 who were willing to fight. So I'm just going to stop right there. The number's going to get whittled down to 300 before we're over and done with. But the Lord tells him, you got too many. This was 32,000 against 100,000, if I'm not mistaken. I think there's, if I recall right, there's like 100,000 Midianites somewhere, maybe in this passage. Why would God say there's too many? I mean, it tells us here, that they'll boast, but why is that a problem?
He didn't want them to think they had done it in their own might.
Because you're right with the staggering numbers, though, you would still think they would be like, we depended on God because we were outnumbered 3-1. But obviously in this situation, God wanted the numbers to be so skewed and out of balance that there would be no denying, not only by the Israelites, but by the people they defeated and surrounding folks. I think there was a lesson to be learned, not only for the Israelites, but people who would hear of this story to fear their God. Yeah,
and so that's what I see in it partly is clearly 22,000 of them are afraid or fearful.
Yeah.
Those are dangerous people at times to accomplish something. They think they're afraid, they're fearful, and all of a sudden they win something, and they go, and they get their chest poked out when they shouldn't. And it was a specific kind of people that went home both times.
Right. You could look at it one perspective and say, even though they were obviously timid and afraid, at least they were with the army. They were willing to go, although they may not have been the best performers and may not have done what was necessary when the time came when the conflict actually began.
Yeah, all they needed was an excuse, though.
Yeah,
that's all they needed.
And then they were out of there.
Right. So the question that I ask when I read this is, why are people's commitments so flimsy? Y'all have any theories on that?
Go ahead, Cheryl.
I mean, I think it can often depend on what the cause is and how committed they actually are to that. Because we don't know the situation of how he got all these people together. He could have
Right.
said, it could have been like a draft where he said, well, if you're this age
You
or
gotta
older,
come.
then you're coming. And
Well, they did that a lot. If you're
Right.
20,
Sure.
you can fight.
and they thought, I don't even want to be involved in this, so yes, I'm going home.
Yeah, I think anytime there's a risk to us, whatever it looks like, that it is easy to be timid or afraid to rise to the challenge. And it may not be a risk of our lives as it would have been for these warriors, but we risk money, relationships, etc. It can overwhelm us, but as it relates to the things of God and the house of God, it seems that our culture is ever drifting further and further away from the sense of commitment. At least that's my perception.
Yeah, well, for me, it looks like 2/3 of the people are with him, but they're not with him. What are some of the dangers of having people with you, but they're not with you? Like, you're dependent on them, but they can't be dependent on. First sign of trouble, like, hey, we're rolling.
Well, as in this story, it appears that he's got this X amount of people that he can depend on and work with, and that God can work with and work through, when the reality is they're, like you said, they're there, but they're not really there. And so you can make decisions. Even as a church, you can make decisions, based on numbers, finances that you perceive are actual commitments long term, when in fact they may not be. And then later down the road, all of a sudden you're like, ugh, this isn't working out so good, because the people that you thought you could depend on all of a sudden aren't coming through for you.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, I think it puts you in a position where you're going to be left to do things on your own that you shouldn't be, or maybe you can't do on your own, and it's going to leave you unprepared, feeling abandoned, I think.
So the story goes on. It says he's going to get rid of a second group of people, but the Lord told Gideon, there are still too many. I would love to know what's going through Gideon's mind right now.
Yeah.
I
think I'd be going like, I misunderstood.
Well, I heard a preacher, he was an evangelist, traveling preacher. He was visiting a church, and he was up preaching, and he told the church, he said, this church needs a Gideon revival. About 90% of you need to leave so this church can grow.
Oh, wow.
I was like, oh, well, God bless this pastor. He says, bring them down to the spring, and I will test them to determine who will go with you and who will not. When Gideon took his warriors down to the water, the Lord told him, divide the men into two groups. In one group, put all those who cup water in their hands and lap it up with their tongues like dogs. In the other group, put all those who kneel down and drink with their mouths in the stream. Only 300 of the men drank from their hands. All the others got down on their knees and drank with their mouths in the stream. So they go from 32,000 to 10,000 to 300. These 300 are eliminated for a different reason. Apparently they wanted to fight, but they didn't have their head completely in the game. What's the difference? Maybe, because sometimes people read this and they think, well, so what's the difference between how they were drinking water? Do you have any theories about it?
It's odd.
It appears the one group, the 300, actually are alert.
Right.
They're not only willing to fight it, it says they are warriors. So apparently all of them are fighters and have some sense of training, and this group willing to stay. They didn't bow out when they had a free pass early on, and so they're ready to go. But only the 300 of these even took a position of awareness and alertness and paying attention, which I do think speaks something to us and our service to God, that He's looking for people who are constantly on the lookout, prepared, paying attention to what's going on, not just willing to show up and do what you're told to do, but are you actually in this thing and looking ahead?
Do you mean because they had their head up?
Their head up, that's right.
Yeah, they
So for me, that's the way I receive it. They have one hand, it says in their hand, not their hands, so they pick it up with one hand, their head's up, their hands on their sword, they're prepared. I'm going to pick on Jay for a minute. his law enforcement background causes him to want to sit facing doors.
Right.
So if you go to eat with him, it's different. He's not quite as intentional, I shouldn't say intentional, aggressive about it as you may have been.
It's not like
in your
I
past.
won't do that,
Right.
but it's just natural tendency.
Right, so you want to see the exits
Yeah.
because you want to have your head up, you want to know
Yeah.
what's going on, you want to know if something bad happens. And that's the distinction that I see between the 300 and the 9,700 was 300 of them were looking for a fight. 9,700 of them didn't think a fight was coming anytime soon, and so they stuck their head in the water and would have taken them a second. It just seems so minimal. You know, it does seem like a minimal distinction because if 100,000 people are attacking you, you're going to have a chance to stand
Yeah.
up.
Right.
But I do think it's important for us to be prepared because our preparation has some bearing on the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's going to have some relationship.
Yeah, there has to be a certain level of proactivity
Right.
if you're going to lead and defend people, and not just reactionary. And that appears to be the separation between these groups here.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we get hit by things. We say we didn't see it coming. I didn't see that coming. Well, it might have been because we had our head in the water instead of our head up looking around, and we've been prepared. We might would have caught it before it comes. So the story goes on, and I'm going to summarize because there's a lot of verses here. God tells them, you're going to go. When I tell you to blow the trumpet, you're going to bust the vases, and there are going to be lights in the hills. And what happens is God creates turmoil, and the Midianites turn on one another and begin to kill one another. Eventually they chase them out. How difficult was it for those 300 warriors who were clearly prepared, who were clearly ready to fight, who were there on their own accord, not to fight when it comes time? How difficult is it to stand back and let God do his thing before you jump in and do your thing?
Well, I'm trying to put myself in this scenario. Even if I'm a warrior and I'm prepared, I'm paying attention, and I know what the odds are, I think I'd be very grateful for the fact that God said, do this. Although it would probably be against your tendency and your training initially, but at the same time to recognize that God is in this thing and we need to give him some opportunity and some time. And that's a difficult thing oftentimes for us as individuals and as leaders, is to stay still long enough to give God time to do what he wants to do and to see it unfold. And so it could have been a challenge for them. It could have been a relief to some degree to say, you know what, okay, we're starting to see, because the numbers didn't make sense to them either, but we're starting to see God's in this thing. And that's a beautiful thing when you begin to see that he's actually in your situation.
Yeah, sure. You have any thoughts about how difficult it was for them to stand back and watch?
I'm sure in some ways it just didn't make any sense to them. It was like marching around the walls for days that were eventually going to come down. It just didn't seem like the type of military tactic that they would normally take.
Right, it doesn't seem like a high operation.
No, but it is another one of those situations that I think God has put these people in to say, just trust me, the way that I'm going to do this is different than the way that you would have done it, but it's going to be the best way.
So that's how I want to close, because you used the word trust there. And the last question that I had here is, what areas are hardest for people to trust God in? This Gideon already didn't want to lead.
Mm-hmm.
He already was resistant to this whole thing. And then he gathers 32,000 people together, and God whittles it down to 1% of that, or less.
A little less than 1%.
And then he tells them, go to fight with a torch, covered by a vase, and we're going to blow a trumpet and tell them that you're coming with torches, I mean, this seems to be, Gideon at this point has to have, I'd knock him for not having enough faith, I'll be honest with you. Early in the thing where he's fleecing and he's refleecing, it's one thing. He don't just fleece God, he refleeces him. But by this point, man, he's got to have some faith to believe that God's going to come through, just to walk into the heels with that group of people. What are some of the hardest places for people to trust God?
I think it's the place that they're in currently. Whether it happens to be financially, relationally, marriage, church, I think the most difficult place to trust God at a time is the one that you're
Where you're at right now, the battle you're fighting right now. Cheryl?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think it can be the future too. You know, there's so many unknowns that we convince ourselves we have the ability to change when we usually don't. But
Yeah.
I think it can be hard for you to sometimes just do what he's asking you to do and leave the rest of it alone.
Yeah, and our human nature is to want to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
It might even devolve into manipulation at times.
Yeah.
But it's dangerous, but trusting God is so difficult at times, because you're like, if he would just do this, or if he would just let me do this, or if this would just happen, everything would be okay. And those things either don't happen or it takes so much time, because we're seeing such a small piece of the puzzle,
Yeah.
And anyway, I think that there are some difficult places for us to tread and trust God. I think Gideon's faith over time must have been built so he could walk to this place. And what I hope for at least my own life is that when I don't have as much faith like he did in the beginning, that it'll continue to grow, that I can trust him in the heart of a battle, that he's going to come through for me. Any other things stick out about this passage that y'all wanted to address before we close? All right, well, let's close today in prayer. Thank you, Lord, for your grace. Thank you that you're working on our behalf, even though we can't see how. Thank you that you're moving in our midst and moving pieces around in our life that we don't understand and can't figure out what you're up to. Help us, God, in those times where we have to be quiet in the darkness, waiting on you to work. May we trust you in those moments to believe that you're going to do what you need to do and accomplish what you need to accomplish. And then we'll follow after you in Jesus' name.